Welcome to the MSDW podcast. I'm Jason Gumpert, editor at msdynamicsworld.com. On this episode, I am speaking with Barry Kukuk. He's a co-founder of demand intelligence vendor Netstock, and while he began his professional experience in inventory management in the enterprise space, he and his Netstock co-founders built the company on the premise that small and mid-sized businesses could benefit from the same advanced capabilities. Emerging trends like public cloud services and SaaS business models help them make their idea a reality. Netstock is the sponsor of this episode, and we discuss some of the ways that the world of supply and demand planning is changing today. He tells me about how disruptions of the last 3 years have shaped organizations' approaches to managing their inventory, including a growing embrace of data science. Barry also shares some observations on planning for the future of supply chains, and he tells me about what Netstock's acquisition of Demandworks will mean for the product roadmap. All right. Hi, Barry. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, Jason. Good to meet you.
Likewise. Thanks for being here. I thought we maybe could start by just learning a little more about yourself, your experience, and your work in co-founding Netstock.
Yeah, thank you. So I have been involved in inventory management and optimization probably since about 1999. And I worked with a couple of companies and as a technical person, did some software for I suppose enterprise type inventory management software. And, we were fairly successful, but the big kind of enterprise space didn't really suit me. So I left. And in 2010, my other co-founders and I came together. We've worked together before, in this enterprise software. And we really looked around and we understood that there literally are thousands of small and medium businesses that have the exact same problems as those large enterprises that we served in the past. But there really wasn't anyone to help them out. If someone has an inventory value of, let's say, $1 million, you can't sell them a $500,000 piece of software with consulting and so on top. It just, the ROI is just not there. So we really wanted to help these people. And I think three things came together at that time that made Netstock possible. And the first thing is that software as a service became a business model that was accepted. And that allowed us to charge these SMBs a smaller monthly fee instead of these big upfront fees. The other thing is that started becoming more mainstream was cloud. So that allowed us to, serve these customers at a much lower price point. And then the third thing was that the browser became a platform where you could deliver software on. And so it became much easier to just say, go to this URL and access your inventory management software than, have all this stuff installed and connected and so on. And that was really been our mission since 2010, is to really also arm these small and medium, these upcoming businesses with the tools and technologies and the best practices that the big guys take for granted. Because, I don't know about you, but I don't want to live in a world where there's only Amazon and Walmart. I want a rich, diverse ecosystem. And it's been our mission to help these guys to also compete in the kind of data arena that the big guys play in.
That's really interesting. It sort of dovetails with one of the things that I'm probably bringing up on a lot of our podcast episodes in recent years, which is, the idea that more advanced analytics, more advanced computing capabilities are not falling, but, arriving into the hands of smaller and mid-sized businesses, things that would have, like you said, been out of reach, too expensive, and just inaccessible for a variety of reasons. And it sounds like you were kind of on the forefront of that, as you said, as those conditions came together along with your work.
Yeah.
And bringing that. What are some of those sort of modern capabilities when you talk about demand and supply and demand?
Yeah, I think, what happened in the last kind of maybe 10 to 20 years is that a seismic shift really has happened in the world of, supply chain. And that is exactly this big data thing. And if you look back, maybe 10 years, the Amazons and the Walmarts of the world have literally realized that they're sitting on mountains and mountains of data, and they invested in a lot of technology, but also a lot of data scientists. They would just employ 1,000 data scientists to understand how to optimize their supply chains. And these companies are no longer just supply chain companies or inventory companies or retailers. They really are data companies that also happen to do some retailing on the side, if you understand what I'm saying. But the problem is, they changed the landscape so radically that, the smaller, even the mid-sized companies either haven't realized that that's happened, or they realize it's happened, but they don't know how to start competing in that arena. And I think that's the biggest change that happened in the last kind of 15, 20 years, is that, those kinds of data-driven decisions have become the norm for at least the big guys.
When it comes to like trends that are changing in terms of demand, what have businesses learned as the pandemic has played out and the various other global challenges, global trends that are impacting it?
Yeah, so I can talk from an inventory point of view, and I think what happened during the pandemic is the major problem has been on the supply side. So as everyone knows, lead times started going up. We've had customers where, they would get stuff from China into the US within 90 days. And slowly but surely, those lead times crept up to 9 months, 12 months in some instances. And then even then, they didn't even know if, they would even get the inventory. So for a long time, probably for about 2 years, supply side has really been an issue. And unfortunately, what a lot of people did is they said, right, I'll take anything I could get. And they just bought as much inventory as they could get. And as the supply chains started getting a little better, the pandemic kind of went a little bit better. The China lockdown, the hard lockdowns started lifting, shipping lanes started opening, all the inventory started arriving in their warehouses. And unfortunately for everyone, at the same time, that exact same time, the demand side completely collapsed. Suddenly we have high inflation rates, so people are tightening their belts. We have high cost of money, and suddenly the demand patterns are not the same as they were. And what's happening right now is that we see a lot of people sitting with a lot of inventory in their warehouses that they don't know how to, push down downstream, because the demand is completely dried up. So it's kind of the double whammy. The other boot came down, and the guys are now sitting with excess. And it's not even just the small and medium guys. I mean, I've seen people like Target having massive amounts of overstocked warehouses. Revlon is struggling because of exactly these kinds of conditions. So yeah, it's been a tough time in the supply chain game in the last couple of years.
When you talked about, businesses just ordering sort of as much as they were able to in those early times when the supply was really constrained, and now looking back and having a different condition, do you think some of those organizations could have or should have handled that better? Because it sort of sounds like maybe there was some just blind buying of amassing as much inventory as they thought they could take on, whereas now that the situation's different.
You're right, Jason. I think it's that classic bullwhip effect. The disruptions kind of come down the supply chain and they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and people panic. And it's interesting to see, in the beginning of the pandemic, you would see household people panic buy things like toilet paper and so on, gloves and hand sanitizer. And I think that same kind of mentality just kind of kept going even in organizations. I suppose an organization is just a bunch of people, and it's the same mentality that went through. So they didn't plan properly. They panicked, and they just, ordered as much as they could, which of course also didn't help everyone else. It's like the traffic jam when there's a massive traffic jam on the freeway and people try and bypass the traffic jam and push in the front. It just makes the traffic jam worse. It's the kind of same thing that happened. I think everyone tried to order more than they needed, and it just made the whole problem bigger. So yeah, the planning wasn't what it should have been.
When it comes to the algorithms or maybe some of the other computing that goes into stock models, inventory management, what should either inventory managers themselves or supply chain professionals or consultants who help supply chain professionals, what should they know about sort of what the state of the technology is today?
Yeah, so what's very interesting is that a lot of people try to manage these very complex supply chains on an Excel spreadsheet, and they go to their textbooks and they go, oh, here's a nice formula for economic order quantity and so on, and they push those into a spreadsheet, and forecast is whatever we sold in the last 6 months plus 10%, kind of thing. And I suppose that will work if you have a few items and you can monitor that closely. But once you get a little bit more sophisticated, and especially when your data requirements go up, you have to be a lot more predictive than what an Excel spreadsheet typically can give you. So what we've seen is that predictive technologies really start to help these small and medium businesses. So of course the easiest predictive technology to speak about is forecasting. And if you have a good forecasting model that can understand and react to changes far quicker than you can do in your Excel spreadsheet, that already helps. So and in both ways, right? So the demand might be going up, but it also might go down, like we see right now. And if you could have reacted earlier to that demand starting to taper down and forecast that you're not going to be selling all of those items, you probably would have started looking at stopping your deliveries if possible, canceling those deliveries. So the predictive nature is very important. The second most important thing that we find is to plan your inventory levels in your warehouses based on the risks. And the two major risks that we take into account and we think is best practice is your supply risk and your demand risk. So obviously on both sides of the equation. And your supply risk, in this time frame when supply went completely haywire, started going up and up and up. But it didn't go up from for example, your lead time didn't go up from 90 days to a year in a week's time. It gradually started pushing up. And if you were able to measure those risks continuously, you would have been far better equipped to react to those things in real time. And the same with your forecast risk. So again, the demand didn't just fall off a cliff in one day. It took a bit of time. And if you can keep on measuring what did we forecast and what are we actually selling for today or this month or this week, and start toning down those expectations, you would be in a better position. So it's predictive, and then it's measuring are the predictions right, which I think gives you an edge over someone who doesn't use this kind of technology.
All right. So if you're a Dynamics 365 user today, and you're also worried about your demand planning, and you're looking at the external factors, war around the world, recession, like you mentioned, interest rates going up, risks of inflation, are there probably signs in your data today that you may be looking to, like you said, stop some of your shipments or change your order patterns, other things that you could be adjusting to maybe compensate?
Absolutely, Jason. If you can adjust your forecast properly based on the trends, and especially recent trends, then it's fairly easy to see where you're overstocked, for example. And then you can say, okay, I'm overstocked in these items, but the problem is that not all items are created equal, right? So some of your items might be fast movers and they make you a lot of money. We call them A items or high velocity items. If you're overstocked in those items, it may not be such a bad thing because they are selling at the moment. You are still selling them. So all you have to do is stop ordering more, and you'll get your overstock situation into shape fairly quickly. But other items might be your slower moving items, or your C items that don't give you a lot of margin. They move slowly. If you're overstocked on those items, you've got a much bigger problem, right? Because yes, of course you have to stop ordering those because you're already overstocked and you don't need more. But just stopping new items arriving isn't going to solve the problem because these things don't move very fast. And this is now where you might want to start looking at, what is it costing me to carry these items? Is it worth my while, based on the forecast that I have at the moment, to maybe carry some of these items for a long time, like 18 months, 2 years? And you have got to, take all of those carrying costs into consideration. So how much does it cost in terms of warehouse space? If it's the kind of stuff that you need to cool, it's cooling costs. It is, counting the stock. You have to have people. You have to insure the stuff. It might deprecate. It might even, go obsolete, and so on and so on. So what you have to do there is do a calculation to say, right, if I have to keep this stuff for 18 months, it might cost me $1 million to keep it, just to have it on hand. It might be better to sell that stuff now at a loss, and even if I lose $500,000, I'm still in a better position than having to fork out $1 million over the next kind of year. So it becomes very, very important to predict what sales are going to be into the future, and B, understand that not all the items are the same. So, and then attack the items depending on, where they fall on that spectrum, attack them in different ways. And you might even think about, right sizing your catalog of inventory that you keep. We all understand the 80-20 principle. And if you can only, manage to carry 20% of your items, make those the 20% of the items that really count, because you can probably still do 80% of your business by just carrying 20% of those items on hand. So, it's a very multidimensional problem, but it's definitely something that is solvable by looking at the data that you have in your ERP system.
All right. I guess focusing on maybe some of the businesses that you talk to, maybe some of your customers even, how are they changing some of the ways that they do optimize their supply chains beyond maybe what you've already mentioned? I'm thinking of, emerging technologies, maybe emerging thinking around things like nearshoring, 3D printing, other changes in the way that they do business to, make the most of their supplies and optimizing their supply chains.
Yeah, absolutely. So like you said, nearshoring is definitely a hot topic at the moment. Everyone is looking at, where can we get inventory, source inventory, instead of the normal channels. And again, like I said, with the excess inventory, the same calculation goes into, it might be less expensive to get it from China or from, overseas, but the delays might actually, the opportunity cost in the delays in getting this stuff might not be worth it for the savings and costs. So it might be better to get from a local supplier. They might charge you more, but if you can get the stuff in the right time, so you can then, obviously on-sell that to your customers, that might be a much better strategy. And again, you can do the same kind of calculations and the same kind of statistical analysis on which items should I have on long-term slow orders and which ones should I have on shorter-term, more expensive orders. The other thing that we're seeing is that a lot of our customers are looking at their internal supply chain. So everything they control internally. So they might have a few DCs, they might have a manufacturing facility, and they might have some retail outlets. And just by balancing the inventory in that internal supply chain, you can already alleviate a lot of the problems that you have. So it might be much, much easier and quicker to transfer inventory from your West Coast warehouse to your East Coast warehouse than to replenish your East Coast warehouse, from overseas. And again, if you have all the data in your ERP, that should be a fairly simple exercise to understand where do you have the excesses and overstocks, and where do you have the shortfalls, and how can you rebalance your internal supply chain? And just by doing that, you can already buy yourself, a large amount of, reduce the pain by a large amount.
And I'm curious, when it comes to, changing trends or different ways of thinking for like your customers or your businesses more broadly out in the world, they're changing techniques. Maybe they're looking at different factors or technology changes. Does that then spark you and your team to, update your own offerings, your own solutions to kind of meet the market where it is? Is that something that ever comes up?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our product management team internally, always keeps an eye on, what do our customers want and need? What are new trends in the kind of industry? And also, what are competitors doing? Let's be honest, we don't all think of the best things first. So we also keep an eye on that. And so when we start seeing these kinds of trends, we either repackage existing functionality in a way that makes sense for the current environment, or we start developing new technologies just to help out. So for example, something we've done in the pandemic lockdown era was, years, 3 months where you sold nothing because there was a hard lockdown. But that's not representative of the real demand, right? So can we compensate those 3 months or replace them with, something similar from another year, a previous year, or something like that? So that's the kind of things we do to help and react and to help our customers to stay relevant and to make their lives easier. And then, of course, the third thing we do is we look at any M&A opportunities. So are there companies out there who have a specific feature or feature set that we don't have but will help our customers? And then we look at, acquiring, such technologies and bringing it into the fold. So, yeah, you're absolutely right, Jason. We're always looking at how to, best help our customers and new customers by looking at what's going on in the world and what's going on in the environment.
Yeah, one of the other areas I wanted to touch on was suppliers and relationships. Well, relationships with suppliers and also, I guess, relationships with customers as well when it comes to businesses carrying inventory and having obligations, obviously. Can you talk a little bit about how you recommend that your clients sort of measure the performance of their suppliers?
Yeah, that's very, very important portion of the whole management of inventory is your supplier performance management. So how Netstock helps our customers is we help them to measure every time a supplier delivers some inventory that we ordered from them. As we measure how long did it take, how much did they deliver, did they over deliver, under deliver, was it too late, too early, and so on. And if you can just keep track every time that one of those deliveries come in, how long did they say it will take, how long did it really take, and so on, we can start building up a risk profile for that supplier. But not just that, we also build up a risk profile far more granularly based on, this item to this DC from that supplier. So it might be different, for example, from the same supplier to my East Coast DC, compared to my West Coast DC. So that's the one part of it. So we understand the risk and we understand how well the supplier is performing and, how much is on time and in full and all those kinds of things. But the second part that's very important is, again, doing that predictive analytics and looking at what are we going to buy from this supplier into the future based on our forecast, downstream. And, what we then allow, we have a portal, we allow our customers to go and work with the supplier and say, hey, Mr. Supplier or Mrs. Supplier, this is what we've bought from you in the last 24 months. And, you can give a histogram of, every month and how many dollars we spent with you. This is what's currently outstanding. This is what's overdue. So there's a good discussion right there. Why is this overdue? When can we expect it in? Are there any contingencies we can take? But then very importantly, when you can sit down with your supplier and say, this is what we're going to order from you into the future. Next month, it's going to be $500,000. The month after that, 600. And then we go into the high season, it's going to be $1 million and so on. That becomes really, really important to your supplier because that becomes their forecast, right? So if you can give them a far better forecast, you are in a far better position to start negotiating better terms, better lead times, better minimum order quantities, and all those kind of things. So that is something, if we can measure the supplier, understand what the risks are, look at the future, what we're going to sell from and what we're going to buy from the supplier to sell, then we can have a far more intelligent conversation with the supplier. And that allows them to then, build up that relationship in a far stronger way than before.
Yeah, really interesting. And that's really one of the things that seems like there's so much to take advantage of is that those relationships. And, I don't know how much, if you have any other thoughts about that, but just I wonder about the ability to make the most of those relationships, I guess on maybe both sides, on the supplier side, but also with how maybe it impacts relationships with a business's customers too. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, as like you say, as important as your supplier relationship is, so is your customer relationships, right? And if you can already see that we are having a supply problem and we cannot supply the stuff to our customers, if you have all of the data and the analytics up front, and you can already give your customer a heads up far ahead of time, that really helps them. Right, so they can start making contingency plans. They can start deciding that they might have to get this inventory from a different supplier or from overstock in another warehouse, and so on. I think that really buys a lot of goodwill with your customers just by giving them a heads up. And of course, that becomes really easy. Like I said earlier, if you have all of the data, you do all of the predictive analytics, and you understand that, hey, sorry, my customers, I won't be able to supply you in time, or we are expecting limited, supply from our suppliers, and you might only get a portion of what you normally order. That is invaluable information for your customers also. So I think it's, supply chains is yes, it's trucks moving inventory around and that kind of thing, but it's also the relationships, right? And it's probably more so the relationships. And, if you can keep those relationships strong and honest, and if you can use the data to move as much as the inventory between you and your supplier, between you and your customers, I think you'll be in a far better position than, a lot of other companies out there.
Really interesting and timely. Anything else that you want to add today in terms of what Netstock is doing? Anything else that's on your mind that you'd want to share with listeners?
Yeah, Jason, I don't know if everyone is aware, but we bought a company called Demandworks at the end of last year, tying in with, how do we look at the market and what do we see? And these guys, the reason we were interested in these guys is their software is really, really good on the demand side, the demand planning. So it can do a lot more interesting demand planning patterns than, what we've been able to do historically. So, for example, you can easily forecast by size, color, style, for example, or you can, roll forecasts up, look at the aggregated demand, and then roll it back down to the items and all of that kind of stuff in real time, which is really, really impressive software. They also have some great capacity constraint planning in that software. So what we're able to do now is to say, right, this is what you need to build or assemble or, manufacture. But looking at the constraints that you have in your factory, this is the optimal way to run this factory. So, those capabilities became really, really important for our customers, in the last couple of years. And so that's why we invested in this technology, and we are busy building this stuff into our application. Of course, you can still get, that technology standalone. And a lot of our customers are now running both of our systems on the demand side and the supply side. So, that's just an example of, us always looking what our customers need and listening to what they want. And, we understood that we couldn't build that kind of capability in time to really help our customers. So it was a good idea for us to acquire that technology straight into our business. So I think that's a very, very exciting development. Like I said, we've got a couple of customers who are now exploring using both systems to, improve their demand planning on the one end and still have the great inventory optimization on the other end, and, just going that one step further with, their supply chain planning than what they've been able to do before.
All right, excellent. And I guess, like you said, even more of an integrated experience to come.
Yeah.
Great. Well, Barry, thank you so much for being here. Really great to hear your perspective on some of these really timely topics. Thanks a lot for your time.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you for having me.
This has been another episode of the MSDW podcast. My thanks once again to Barry Kukuk of Netstock for joining me. And this message from Netstock. For more information on unlocking the data in your ERP to drive smarter supply chain decisions, check out Netstock's new ebook. We've left a link in the show notes to that. And that's it for this episode. If you want to get in touch with me, send an email at jgumpert@msdynamicsworld.com. For all of our updates, you can follow us on LinkedIn and on Twitter. Until next time, this is MS Dynamics World, signing off.